All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly office hours for MSU Beekeeping. I'm Megan Milbrath. I'm a assistant professor in the Department of Entomology and Large Animal Clinical Sciences in the department or in the College of Veterinary Medicine.
I'm Zachary Huang. I've been at Michigan State for 26 years, studying honeybees. Um, Study mostly stresses on honeybees, effect on eczema, varroa mites, transportation, pesticides, temperature stress, etc. on honeybees.
So tonight, we will start, or we're free and open to everybody with all of our programs. We've got some resources we're going to start out with tonight, so you can use this QR code, and I'll also put the link in the chat. So every month we send out an article of some relevant resources, events, and things like that. So I'll leave this up for a second, and I'm going to try to multitask and put this in the chat. Oops, there's supposed to be one more.
There's a survey also.
Yep, and then I don't know why all these slides were hidden. Um, this is what happens when Anna leaves. And there is a survey, so we need to collect demographic data. It just helps us for what we're doing. So I'll put that up as well. And then a couple more resources that we have available for tonight. Excuse me. So one of them, for those of you who came in a little bit or a few minutes ago, you heard Zachary talking about swarms. We are absolutely in swarm season. That is the um, main topic that we're going to talk about tonight, but we do get a lot of swarm calls at MSU. So I have people that will call my phone from all over the state to report both swarms and cutouts. My response is that I send them all to the Michigan Beekeepers Association site on problem bees. So I'm also going to put that link in the chat. If you are a member of Michigan Beekeepers Association, I believe it's for members, you can be listed as a person to catch swarms. Anybody who does cutouts can be listed there as a person who does cutouts. It's really useful for me and others because I can just direct all my calls to that location and then people can call in. So, like I said, we've already seen one in Michigan, or in East Lansing that I've gotten one call. So they're definitely starting. Um, and so if you want to sign up there, or you can also direct people there. Um, Another thing is that we've got some other events coming up, including one of them that I do want to highlight, which will be a couple times, is how to sell honey and maple syrup safely. So this is done through the MSU Product Center, and they're going to give you very good resources on um, how to actually make sure that all of your product is very clean and very legal and that you're disinfecting things well and how to understand the pH strips and bleach and things like that. So for food safety, so if you are selling honey, even if it's not at scale, it's a nice resource. And then the people who do it are very, very knowledgeable and can answer lots of questions. And then the last resource I wanted to highlight was MSU EnviroWeather, because this is something that I do use this time of year, and I'll put the link in the chat. But MSU does have um, weather stations all around the state. And if you go to this website that I just put in there, enviroweather.msu.edu, it will take you to a map of all of the stations. You can click on the station that you're interested in, and it will give you current weather at that station, but then a lot of data on it. And what is really useful is it shows you all the historical data as well. So you can see, like, if I look at the East Lansing one on campus, we actually are a pretty normal year where 987 days at base 32 or degree days, meaning that that's the amount of time that we've been above freezing for this year. And we're at about average, which can help me time when different things are going to bloom. So if you want to know when apples are going to bloom in your area, because that's a big sign of when swarm season is going, you can go to EnviroWeather and look at the weather station and kind of see where you are in terms of the year. So those were all the resources for MSU that I wanted to highlight. I said I'll go back to this one again if people want to do it. And then what we are planning on doing tonight is just briefly updating what we've been doing in our own bee worlds, and then giving lots of time for Q&A. We've had a couple questions come in over email. I can see one coming in the Q&A right now, but if people want to add them right now, you're more than welcome to start adding them in. So, Zachary, did you want to start with updating what you've been doing excitingly this last week?
Yeah, I just came back actually this morning from a red eye flight from Phoenix, Arizona. So I was trying to take pictures of honeybees foraging on cactus. A lot of different cactus are blooming now, but I was mainly interested in seeing if honeybees forage on the giant cactus, a savanna cactus that's like um, 20 feet tall and very hard to get a good picture of. So I was lucky. I did see some bees foraging on those flowers. They're actually usually bed and moth pollinate at night, but honeybees will try to get pollen and nectar in the morning, somewhere probably between 6 and 10 a.m. most of them. So that was fun, but I got baked and got all tanned up in the desert for 4 days. Uh,
I mean, that sounds kind of wonderful. I'm very much looking forward to see the cactus pictures added to your site for sure.
yeah, so post a blog soon once I get the pictures out. Uh, and my main photo website is beetography.com, which has a few hundred species of honeybee flowers. So if you're interested,
Okay, I
thank
just
you.
put that I put the spelling of it in the chat. I think I got that right.
Yeah.
Um, Excellent. And then, so this week for me has been way less fun, or maybe more fun, I guess, depending. So, um, so on campus, we manage about, I think, 150-ish hives, well, before splits this year. And then in my own bees down in Jackson County, this year I've got about 50 hives. And we've been doing splits in earnest down in Jackson and Ingham counties, so south central part of Michigan. Um, where I am, we've gone through, so like I've said, I've gone through, that many hives this week, and not all of them have needed to be split. Not all of them have been urgent to be split. I had one yesterday or 2 days ago that had queen cells and was really fixing to swarm. Most of the rest of them were pretty ready. We did split a little earlier than normal on campus because we knew that the nighttime temperatures weren't getting that cold. And then also we were making pretty big splits. So we, in both locations, had pretty good survival. So we didn't need to split dramatically in order to get numbers up. And so we were kind of taking a really hearty split and leaving both of them in pretty good sizes. If I knew it was going to be a lot colder nights, then in the 10-day forecast, then I probably wouldn't have split. If we also did see lots of drones that were out and emerged, and some of them that were even, mature and flying, but I haven't started queen rearing, and I don't usually start until we're done with, like another week or so down here. So at MSU, we used a lot of mated queens, and then I'll show a diagram of kind of the type of split um, that I do. And then that's what some of the questions that we had about. So um, for my system of doing splits, the first thing that I do in like mid-April is just add a box of drawn comb on top of the hives, like just across the board. And that does two things. That gets the equipment out of my garage and out in the bee yard because I'll need it for whatever I'm going to do next anyway. And then it also allows the bees to have some space to go up. So for those of you that are further north from me, you're probably at that time right now. If you're not looking to split yet, you're going to be considering putting a box on top. And I want it on there before anything starts to bloom so that the bees can clean it out, get it ready. And then by the time food comes in, they have space above the brood nest to put nectar into. So I did that this year and it's all kind of cleaned up, ready to go. I can use those frames and then the brood nest doesn't get clogged up as easily with the nectar. And that's really the thing that pushes that swarming urge. So that's what I did about a week ago. And then, week and a half, 2 weeks is kind of the amount of time that that gives you. And then this last weekend, I went out and like I said, it didn't feel urgent, which means I didn't see queen cells. We don't have a ton of nectar down here right now. So cherries have started blooming. Dandelions obviously have started blooming. But we're not in like the deep, like autumn olive hasn't gone. So we're not like heavy duty. Apples have just started. So like I said, we're just starting swarming. We're supposed to get 24 hours of rain tomorrow. And then the weather forecast after that is much warmer. And I think what we're going to see is that like all the bees are going to be kept in for a day. The warm weather's going to happen, and then next week is when we'll see the swarms start, which is pretty much, like I said, a normal schedule for us down in central Michigan. So you can kind of extrapolate to where you are in the state or in the country um, for that. So we do have I think the night after it's supposed to get down to 34 degrees where I am. We're not out of the last chance of a potential frost. So the way that I set my hives up is I've done the splits, but I haven't moved the splits off of it. And so this is a version of the Demaray type split, and I've got a diagram for it. So this is this system that I set up. And so what I do is I go out to the bee yard and I don't know why it changed it to blue and yellow. Um, but I'll go out to the bee yard and I'll take the whole hive apart in the original location. So I'll go all the way down to the bottom box. I usually take the time to scrape off the bottom board if it's not clean already. I'll put 2 frames of brood down below, and if I see the queen while I'm going through, I'll put the queen down there. If I don't see her, I just make sure that she's not in these frames up here. And I do that by just shaking all the frames or brushing all the bees off of those frames before I put them above. So the queen is down here with 2 frames of brood. There's some honey on the outside. And then I put this box that was sitting at the top of the hive that I had added before. That goes down there. And that box is basically empty with a tiny bit of nectar. So and then I have a queen excluder and a medium super that also has drawn comb. And so this is what I'm actually leaving for that hive. And then up here is all of the capped brood, basically, and maybe a little more. So if this hive had 6 frames of brood, I'll put it all in this top box. If you had more, you could even make 2 deeps with this. And then this is what I'll come by and take later. Like I said, at MSU, we were using mated queens because we need to get started for all of our research. So we just took this box off and put mated queens in. Um, you can allow them to raise up a queen cell in this configuration. They'll generally start to raise queen cells up here, or you can take it off and add a queen cell. There is a version where you can go up like within a week, cut down all the emergency cells that they raise and allow it to recombine, but that doesn't always work to prevent swarming because you still end up with this big colony. The main reason that I like this version of doing the splits is like I said, so I did this Saturday when it was really nice. We had 65 degrees, and then Sunday it was 40 and rainy, and I could move these top boxes on Sunday, and the bees had gone up and provided sufficient coverage to that top box and to all that brood. And so the bees were able to, I could take that box off knowing that brood nest had enough coverage, or I can wait another week because once it's in this configuration, it's not going to swarm. So I can, like I said, go down there, cut off the swarm cells, and then take that off another week once the 10-day forecast looks even better. So for those of us in cold climates, this is a nice system because you can do a lot of work in that. So we did get a couple questions about this system. So someone did this type of split and they took all the brood to the upper box and left the queen with no brood at all. And they said, did they make a mistake not giving her capped brood? I don't generally leave a ton of brood down below, but you do leave at least a tiny bit. And the main reason is just so that you do have some bees that stay down there with the queen. You don't want to completely abandon her and move the whole hive up and just leave her down below. But I do try to take most of the capped brood because that's also giving them a brood break. And I'm basically taking all the varroa out, and then what I'll do is I'll give them a queen cell. So then both this top and this bottom will get a brood break. Someone also asked in this configuration, will bees move capped honey from the bottom box to the super to give the queen more places to lay in the bottom box? The bees will move nectar and honey around. Honey not as quickly as nectar, but if you put it down below, they will move it back up. Pollen, they don't move quite as much, so you do want to think about what goes on top. And then it says, do the bees in the top box migrate down to the queen in the bottom box when they get older? And these bees can move around all the time. So they will be covering this brood nest or foraging basically depending on temperature. And then if you wanted to make, so the next question is that if they're hoping to make nukes from queen cells in the top box, what's the minimum number of bees to start with a queen cell? As long as you're leaving it on here while that queen cell gets or while it's open, it will get fed and supported by all the bees in the hive. So you can make a pretty good um, cell out of that. So much better than if you just took this nuke off and wanted them to raise a cell on their own. All right. So someone had asked if we'd describe the process of splitting the hive. Um, so that was kind of all that I had on that one. Here's the rest of the slides. All right. So you can add more questions. If you have questions after this webinar, we answer them through this website. If you just Google Ask Extension, it will go to someone, and these can be any sort of extension questions. We'll answer those. But for tonight, we'll just do the Q&A ones. So, Zach, are you still there and up for answering some questions? All right.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I've got a couple people saying they can't see the slides.
I saw,
You can
I
see it?
saw.
Okay.
Uh,
Um, well, we do have it. So one of the resources that we have is on the May resources, there's some articles about swarms and they have the diagram in there as well. But I'm happy to explain it if people still haven't seen it. All right. So the very first question we had, someone said, what are cutouts when I was talking about the problem and unwanted bees? And we do differentiate between people who are willing to pick up swarms and people who are willing to pick up cutouts. So the swarms would be the ones that are just bivouacking or temporarily staying in a tree or something like that. Whereas a cutout means they've already started making comb and they've set up an actual hive configuration inside a house or a barn or a wall or something like that, and they actually need to be cut out and removed. So lots of beekeepers will pick up swarms, and very few people will actually do the work of doing a cutout where you're removing it from a wall. And some people love it. It's not for me, but if you like it, that's great.
It's a
All
lot of
right.
work. Yeah.
It's a lot of work, and you
Mm.
have to be comfortable like taking a sawzall to someone's home. Um, all right. So there is a question, Zachary, someone in southern Indiana, and they said they are getting a lot of rain. I mean, a lot. And they said their concern about this is that all the rain will wash the nectar out of the flowers. How do you feel about that? Is there concern about too much rain washing nectar out?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Rain will actually affect in several different ways. One is even if they're not Russian, there are bees cannot fly in the rain. They usually try to avoid flying out during a rainy day. So that's number one. Number two is rain is associated with the cooler temperature and that would affect the nectar production by the plant, even if it's not washed out. So then the third one is when the do secrete nectar, depending on the flower morphology. Like some flowers, maybe okay, like blueberries, because they always drape toward below, so the water doesn't really wash the pollen or nectar away. But other flowers like pears and cherries, for example, and peach, so they are more or less toward the up direction. So rainwater will definitely wash the nectar away if they're producing during that time. So that's a valid concern. And in general, if a plant is blooming for 10 days and you rain during all that 10 days, you're going to lose uh, no honey production, also very little pollination for the trees. So that's always a concern for the growers when the weather is marginal, cold and rainy. That's bad for both plant and the bees. Yes, so that does impact your honey yield. And that's the problem is there's not much you can do when it rains. Yeah. But it's a good question.
Yeah, that was a good question. So the second one, it says we did a split for swarm prevention mitigation. Yay. We were given a few virgin queens to place in two of the hives. We believe we have plenty of drones available. Any thoughts on how to best introduce a virgin queen to a split? Um, so I think the person who talks about this the most and who has the a good system for this is Corey Stevens, and I believe he has a YouTube video. I've heard him do this talk on his system of doing it. I do think that, in my experience, the virgins are the hardest to do compared to either queen cells or mated queens. My preference, if I have to install virgins, is to put them into a nuke first that has very young bees in it. So what you can do is you can kind of add them to you can make up a nuke with bees that are in the process of emerging and keep it in the same yard as the original hive. So all the foragers go back, and then you can get her established in there and then combine that nuke with a full size hive once she's going. But it is definitely best to put her in as soon as possible, so that she can be out as soon as possible because the bees don't necessarily like to take care of the virgins as much as they do for regular mated queens. And then I would also say make sure that you wait like 24 hours before you put her in after you have made up um, the split. All right. So, Zachary, I'm going to just talk through this one and maybe you can give an opinion or we can. So, someone said, I just had a swarm this evening at 5 p.m. Starting, the swarm was located in a pine tree in my yard. The queen with this hive, I did the following in April. Okay, so I marked her and clipped one wing. The swarm behavior was different. They left the pine tree and came back to the hive. I then added a super to the hive and gave more room and took away the queen excluder. In April, I did also add two drawn comb mediums above the queen excluder. Was this correct? So I think maybe, Zachary, do you want to talk about why the swarm would go back in the hive?
Yeah. Uh, so the swarm was a failure from the bee's point of view because they found the tree branch to land and to settle, and they found the queen didn't come along because you clipped half of the wing. So that queen could be still in the hive, could be dropped to the grass in front of the beehive, and if it's too far away, very few bees found her. She wouldn't be able to find her way back because unless she started as a virgin queen from that hive, all the queens we have introduced, buying a queen or uh, anyway, it's a mated queen introduced as mated queen. They did not go through the orientation flight to recognize the home hive. So they have no clue where the original hive was. So if they drop to the grass, if it's like 1 feet away, she could crawl back and with some bees guiding. But if it's, I would say if it's 6 feet or 10 feet away, she is gone now. Yeah. But if you're lucky, you find a ball of bees on the grass, you know that hive swarmed, you could put it back. But what I would have done was, if I know that I've tried to swarm and didn't succeed, I would just make a split. Take that, even if they come back, I'll still make a split because the quote swarm urge is still there. In that colony, the workers have changed their physiology. They have this urge to swarm, so you might as well help them. Uh, so you don't know, of course, you don't know which ones swarm, which ones come back. So just split them into two and give them a queen cell something. Chances are there are multiple queen cells in that hive. So even if that queen didn't come back, old queen, you still have enough cells to give it to two halves of the hive. So that's what I would have done. But people do different things. What you did is also okay. So what's the actual question? That
I think
was,
part of it was why it is a little, and if you want to, the person who asked the question, if you want to give some details if we didn't answer it correctly, I think one of them was why the swarm came back, and
yeah. So
then
yeah,
they also had added, so they'd added equipment above the queen excluder and wondered if that was correct. And that is what I do, but then I count on just the adding equipment buying me just like a week or so of time, not enough to be managing swarming completely.
yeah.
Um,
Yes, I answered the first part why the swarm come back, and that
mhm,
happens almost always because the queen didn't make it to that cluster. Usually because the beekeeper clipped the wings or
mhm.
something else happened.
All right, so there's a question that says, I installed two packages from Georgia in my apiary last Friday. Yay. I checked the hives and the queens are out of their cages, and I saw one of two, which is great, and the bees seem to be settling in. I was shocked at how many drones were going in and out of those hives. The workers didn't seem to care, but the drones seemed aggressive with each other. Should I be concerned? So I think it'd be really surprising that drones would be aggressive to each other. I can't think of a scenario in which they would be. So there could be a couple of things going on is one is that it is just workers and not drones. Another one is it could be something totally else. But I would be very surprised if you had aggressive drones. They're just kind of that's just not their vibe. They just kind of bumble around and go out and fly. So my guess is maybe it's a misidentification, but that might be a nice one where if you can get a photo, the ask extension questions, you can always upload photos. And so if you can get a photo and send it in, then someone can help you with the identification. But that wouldn't be something that you would expect to see. Have you, I don't think you've ever seen any aggressive drone behavior, have you, Zachary?
I don't think they show aggression toward each other. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, I won't be concerned. The only concern is that you didn't get your money's worth. If you bought a 3 pound package and 40% are drones, then it's a bad deal for you. So those most likely those drones came from the package. I have seen some excessive drones, but I won't say more than 10%. I would say 10% is a bad deal for me. But I would say 5% is okay. It's probably normal. Yeah. So if it's too many drones, you just lose productivity because the package fee is sold to you by weight, and drones, of course, are much heavier than workers.
that's true. All right. There is someone that says, I'm new to the area and I've just set up my hives and is going to bait them. If I'm not successful attracting a swarm, is there a resource for getting bees? So like my dad is very lucky in that swarms just always move into his equipment. But in most cases, you're not going to be that lucky unless you are next to another beekeeper who's not managing their swarms well. So it's definitely not a guarantee that you'll catch a swarm, but it is very, very, very location dependent. I mean, there are some people that can catch enough swarms off of other beekeepers that they can sell them for money each year, but there's other people that you could have the most beautiful trap set up and never see one. In terms of where to get them, we are getting a little late in the season. Like most of the packages have come up already, but you can usually find local bees. The website that we direct everyone to is the Northern Bee Network, which I'm going to put in the chat. And I can't multitask. Okay, so it's northernbeanetwork.org, and that is a free listing of all the people that we know that are selling bees locally in Queens. So if you are a person who is selling them, please fill out one because, again, like we get a ton of calls, we get a ton of questions, and it's nice for us to just direct them to that place. So if you have bees and local bees for sale, you can post them on northernbeanetwork.org. It's totally free. We just use donations to keep the site running. So we just use our gift account to pay for the server and for someone to go through it once a year and you can find people that are selling bees. If you don't have anyone near you or everyone's sold out on there, the best thing is just to ask at your local bee club. All right. Someone says, how do you treat for varroa coming off of a demarrhea? So in my mind, the Demarest split is my kind of first Varroa treatment. So in integrated pest management, you want to do mechanical and cultural and all the different types of techniques and including chemical treatments, just whatever you do to keep the mite levels down. So I don't like to do drone brood removal because I do raise queens and therefore I do need lots of drones. So I tend to steer away from that one, but that's another one you could do at this time of year because I definitely saw boatloads of cap drone brood when I was out there. So if you weren't doing that, that's a thing that you could incorporate kind of at the same time that you're doing the split is pull that out of there. Um, what I do is that I count on the queen, like I said, is going to be left alone with hardly any capped brood. So that original hive really does well in that it's like I'm actually physically removing most of the varroa mites from that hive. That is a really nice time where you could put in a treatment like Hopguard or Viroxan, something that could be in the hive if you were concerned about it and wanted to do something even more aggressive. you could put it in with that brood break period. And then the top part that has all the capped brood, in the case where I use a queen cell, that also gets a brood break. And so again, you could put in something. I generally just count the break as being my first action against the varroa mite. But if you wanted to be more aggressive, you could add something. And again, it's going to be small, so something like the Varoxan or HopGuard 3 would be the one that I would put in. Um, all right, there are a lot of questions about the configuration for the splits. So I'm going to maybe talk about, I'll put those back up. Zachary, here's a question about nutrition. With all of this rain, would you be feeding syrup right now?
Depends on your colony. If it's a overwintered colony and you know there's not enough honey, then you don't need to worry. But if it's a package bee, yes, if it rain, and if you know how much food went into the that package initially, uh, so for example, if you some people feed lots of sugar, like if you already feed them, say 4 gallons, and you don't need to worry for 20 days even if it rains. So so it all depends on your situation. But if you only fed 1 gallon, which is probably good for a week or two, and it rained for the next whole week, so you should be considering giving them some more food. But in general, I don't worry if it's overwintered hive. They would have at least 3 or 4 frames of honey on both ends at the very edge, and that would keep them. One frame should last them a week, as if it's a deep frame. Yeah. So then you have more cushion, yeah, more buffering. But package bees are less forgiving because they come with no food and they depend on what you give to them. And if the weather is good, you just give them 1 frame of honey or 1 gallon of food. But if it's been raining for 10 days afterwards, then you have to check. You can do a quick check and see if they have food. And if you only have half a frame left of liquid in the whole 6 frames of bees you have, then you need to feed them more or they could starve to death. Yeah.
Mhm. And where we are, we're getting like a large quantity of rain, but we're also getting good breaks that they can forage. So,
Yeah.
if you've got at least some in there. Um, all right. So there are a couple more. Okay, there's a question that says, how soon can you split a 3-pound package? That's a really good question. And I would say the biggest thing that would depend on for me is whether or not you have drawn comb already. So if this is your very first year and you're using brand new equipment and you install that 3-pound package into your hive, and then you're going to feed them, it does take a really long time for them to draw that comb out and get started. And the biggest thing that you want that will set you up for success in the winter is for them to get everything drawn out. And in the bees will draw out comb depending on the temperature, the size of the colony, and also the time of year. So you want them to basically draw it out as quickly as possible. And then in July or August, if you have foundation, it's going to be really hard or they just really won't want to draw it out. So what you don't want to do is take your hive and then split it into two, and then you're left with a bunch of just foundation in August, and you've got no room to give them. If you, and the other thing too is that two small colonies will draw out way less comb than one big colony does. And so when you split it, you kind of reduce that ability even further. So what I would do is wait as long as possible if you really wanted to split that colony to make up a backup. allow them to get fully established, allow them to fill out basically what they need for the winter. So if you're using like standard length stop deeps, once they've basically filled two deeps, then you could take a nuke out of them. And then that big colony could draw out like a few frames later in the summer. Like this is like July, they could do a few frames, but I would wait until it got pretty big and established, and then you could pull out a nuke. That's also a really nice system. Let's say you did get your package and you're not super excited about the genetics. You allow that queen to go through the big buildup. You allow her to, raise a nice, big, healthy hive. You've got all this drawn comb. You've got a nice big colony. You could take her out, put her to the side in a nuke as retirement, and then you can bring in, a queen cell or mated queen of local genetics or VSH or something new that you want to try, and then you can go into the winter with a really young queen in charge of your hive, which will be better for the next year. So my recommendation would be to wait as long as possible. If you have drawn comb, the process will go much faster for them to fill out those boxes. But I would again wait until you're at the point where they really have plenty to do it. So there is a question about where the process of splitting is outlined, and I'm going to put it in the chat. There's an article that's called Don't Be Surprised by Swarms, and it's got some information in there. And the two things that it has is kind of the system. And I the title that I gave to it, which I mean, this is years ago that I wrote this, was called like a perfectly fine way to make splits. Because it's not something that like you can make walk away splits, you can do the every other splits. There's many ways that you can do it. This is the way that I like to do it because it allows me to deal with these cold swings in the weather. It also allows me to set up the hives, and then I don't have to do the equipment at the same time. So, for example, this weekend on Saturday, I did a yard that had 15 hives, and I'm not splitting very heavy this year just because I don't want to have too many bees. And so I went through and I think, 10 of them needed to be split. And so I went through and I put them all into that configuration. I moved the queens down below. I put all the brood up top. And then I could come back Saturday night, look through my notes, be like, okay, I need to get 10 bottom boards, 10 ratchet straps, 10 lids, and put all of that. And I brought 10 extra deeps to go on top of that. And I grabbed my pallets and everything. And then I could get that all together. And then Sunday morning, when it was 40 degrees out, I could just go out and make those splits kind of at my leisure. So I'm not running around trying to make decisions during the sunny time when you're tired. All right. Um, Okay, here is a question, Zachary. I'm going to give you this one and then I'm going to try to open my swarm presentation. It says, to overwinter your hives, do you use sugar blocks, etc., on top of your top box? If so, what do you do with the sugar when you add the top box in April? So if people are feeding dry food, what should they do with the leftover dry food on the top of the box?
Oh, so the bees didn't finish consuming them. Mm.
Yeah.
I would just make them into syrup, maybe, because in the summer they really won't feed on dry sugar anymore. They do it in the winter when they can't fly out. So it's probably more work for them because basically they have to use water. They suck the condensed water from the hive and dissolve the sugar, lick the sugar, make them become liquid. So it's more involved. So what you could do is to help the bees and make them weigh those sugar. So if it's 2 pounds, you add 2 pounds of water. So that makes 50% syrup, and you can feed them to the bees when it's raining now, and bees could use them. Yeah. Can't really use the sugar for something else because it's quote contaminated for human consumption because there's stuff in it. But for bees, they have ways to clean them out. They're very good at that. Yeah. So
I'm sure there's someone that would buy beehive sugar, some weird person out there. But yeah, I generally don't feed dry sugar unless I absolutely have to. And part of it is just the labor, and so I would actually throw it away. So there is a question in the chat that says most of our brood heavy frames are not in the lower box, but in the upper boxes. Should we reverse the boxes? So I brought up these slides, hopefully that you can see them. And it says, so, and also if you can't see them, I did this the other day in a meeting. If you look at your Zoom controls, sometimes you have to, it's like switching your view from looking at the cameras to looking at the slides. So it might be something in your Zoom controls too. So reversals, I did do a couple reversals this weekend for the ones that didn't need to be split, but I didn't do it for all of them. And it really depends on it depends on a few things. So you can see on the slide, I have reversals question mark. Um, because a lot of times it just doesn't make sense to do it. The idea is that in the winter, the bees are in the top box, and then you would just swap it, and then the bees would be in the bottom box, and they'd have room to go up. This is the scenario that I had in a lot of cases, in that the bees are just in both boxes. So if you split it or if you do a reversal, you're just harassing the bees and messing them up, but you're not gaining any benefit from doing that. So if you've got brood in both boxes, it's not worth it to do a reversal. Um, a lot of times too in Michigan, we're in the situation where you have pollen down below, especially if you have very pollen hoarding bees. Um, and so if you do the reversal in that context, you're going to have pollen above them. And as I mentioned, the bees don't really like to move the pollen. So a lot of times, if I've got this context where I've got a really small colony and it's not in both boxes, what I'll generally do is take that old box away and we'll just add a brand new box on top of it. The other situation that you sometimes see, so this is the ideal one, is if it's really small and it's right in the middle of two boxes and you do the reversal, you can end up breaking up the brood nest. And that can be way worse than doing nothing because this one up here could maybe raise a queen or they can get chilled. So you can do a reversal if it totally makes sense. I have kept a lot of colonies in three deeps, and I started doing that when I was going up to the UP for the winter because I didn't have time to come back and feed. And I've noticed that when I keep them in three deeps, it seems really, really obvious of which ones, like how to do a reversal, because that bottom one was generally empty. In most of the cases, when I'm in two deeps, they're just both filled with bees and it doesn't make sense to do a reversal. So if you're out there, you've already got it opened, you can do it. Notice that I'm talking about only doing it with deeps, and the way the question was worded is that was in the supers. We generally recommend that you take supers off for winter and that you're leaving the bees, you've kind of dedicated equipment for where the animal is versus where the honey is for human consumption. So if you've got honey for human consumption in medium boxes, you would take those off before winter because then the bees are going to move up there. And I 100% am saying this as a person that yesterday went out and had mediums on the bottom of their brood nest because somehow they left a medium on and then I had to rearrange it and now there's mediums in the brood nest. So they can get mixed in, but ideally you're kind of leaving the bees in an appropriate volume for winter. All right, so then there's a couple more questions about that hive configuration or that splitting system again. Um, so a few things too that you can do instead of just doing um, a reversal or doing a split is for some of my hives, if I had a pretty small one and a pretty big one, is you could just take a couple frames of brood out, give it a light shake of the big one, and add it to the smaller one and just increase them. So we're doing, for our research, we like to have colonies that are all the same size. So I need to have 20 hives for this propolis study that we've got coming up that we want to start in 2 weeks. And so what we're going to do on Wednesday is go through and just move frames of brood around so that everyone in 2 weeks will basically be about the same size. Knowing that it's still cold at night, um, I'm not trying to shake all the bees off the brood because you don't want to take a frame of brood from a big hive and take all the bees off of it and move it into a hive that doesn't have enough bees because then that brood's going to get chilled. You're just going to get disease and it's not going to be good. So what I'll do is I'll give it just a light shake and about, some of the bees will come off. Those are usually going to be the older ones and the younger ones will stay on and then I'll put those in. So that's also very easy. You don't necessarily have to do a split, but you can take your capped brood frames and equalize them throughout your operation. All right, so there are a couple more questions. I also want to show, let's see, do I get to, this is slide 87. Okay, this is the one that I call the easiest split ever that someone taught me, and I don't know why it changes my colors. But for those of you who haven't split yet and are a little concerned about it, um, is you just mark every other frame with a dot or an X or whatever you want to do. And you put all the ones with the dots in the middle of some boxes and all the ones without the dots in the middle of the other. And the idea is one will have the queen and one will not have the queen, and the one without the queen will ideally raise up a queen. But this way I like because you don't even have to do any thinking whatsoever, and you push all of the frames that have bees on it into the middle. Um, all right, there is a question about walkaway split. So this is a version of the walkaway split, and someone said, I did a walkaway split today. 2 deeps, 2 supers, lots of bees. I did not see the queen, but was also surprised to find very few eggs on only one frame, along with total of 3 to 4 frames of capped brood and larva, and lots of nectar and pollen. I also saw 2 queen cells. Was I right to go ahead with the split? I also added a super to each. Zachary, did you want to weigh in on that one? So this person, if they did a walkaway split, so why they maybe aren't seeing a lot of eggs this time of year?
Yeah, I would say if you have two queen cells, if the cells are quite mature, it's possible they're preparing for a swarm. So during the swarm preparation, the queen basically have to be stop being fed the good food for 3 days about. That's the conventional wisdom. We probably actually don't have data to see how long you need to starve a queen before she will be able to fly again. But that's a good guess. So most people say it's 3 days. The workers have to stop feeding her all the royal jelly during when she was laying eggs. She has to be fed so many times because somebody calculated. I think eggs, the weight of the eggs she lays per day, 2 or 3,000 is actually close to her body weight. I actually didn't do that calculation. I'm not sure if it's right, but if assume that's right, that means she's given a lot of good food, and it's true. All the food royal jelly has water gelatin and stuff, and actually there's studies showing that the queen bees actually do not digest the protein because a normal way, like if I eat a piece of beef, I The beef doesn't become my muscle. It has to be digested into amino acid, and then my body has to process that and making my protein. But the bees don't need to do that because it's photogenic. It's the same protein queens use and workers use. So the photogenic actually bypass the digestive system, absorb through the midgut and to the blood, and then the queen just packs that into the eggs directly. So that's how fast she can lay eggs, partly because of that. But also that makes her very fat because the ovaries are developed. She can't fly. Like you open a hive, you see a laying queen, you can grab her, do an experiment, try to drop her a feet away from the frame. She just dropped vertically. Maybe some can glide a little bit, but of course the virgin queen can fly, and then the queen that's preparing for swarming will be able to fly. So what's happening is the queen will shut down during that 3 day, even before that 3 days of stop feeding, she would slow down the egg laying. So then you see very few eggs, and that's the normal process. So you probably just caught right in the middle of the swarm preparation. So that's I would say you had the perfect moment of making the split, having the two queen cells, having very few eggs. All the signs are telling you they're going to swarm probably in a week or two. Yeah, so
Yep. Yeah, so if you probably caught it right when they were doing the splitting or swarming process, and they maybe could have had swarmed if those cells were capped, but depending where you are, but doing the split was a very appropriate thing to do. So someone did ask a question about this diagram that's still up, and it says, in this easiest split ever, do you need drawn frames on the outside where in the diagram it looks blank? No, so this is really designed for people who like it's your first year, your hive made it through, and you're splitting. If you have drawn comb, that always gives them advantage. But you can put in foundation for this one too. There is a question that says, do you have suggestions for the type of split for someone that would want to maximize honey rather than the number of hives? So what I would do in that case is try to equalize as much as possible. So taking, like I mentioned, taking those um, frames of capped brood out of the ones that have the lots of capped brood. So you're alleviating the pressure from that one. Oops. And then, oh, I was trying to multitask. See, I can't do it. So you'll alleviate the pressure from that one, and then you can give the frames to the other one. The other thing that you can do is just switch locations of hives too. So if you have a really small hive, you can move it to where they have like in the location of a much bigger hive and move the bigger one to the smaller one. And again, that'll alleviate the pressure from the big one. The original Demaray, the one that I was talking about, I'm going to stop share and go back to it. That one was actually designed as a way to allow the bees to come back together. Um, and so you would split the bees and then you'd allow them to rejoin each other. I can tell you though that when I've done that, it hasn't always worked. In that it stops swarming for that time and then the bees build up again and you have this monster colony and then they want to just swarm again. So, all right, so I'm gonna stop.
another method of maximize honey production is to do two queen systems,
Yeah.
and that reduce swarming and make the colony super big and then produce a lot of honey. But you do have to know some basics of how to do that. I think Roger Hubengala, who might have wrote something in the past, how to create. But it's very similar to the split that Megan is doing. Basically, you have a special board in between, uh, either double screen or sometimes just wooden board. So then you have a secondary queen in the split, and you have a separate entrance, so the queen would mate. And then once you see the new queen mating, you exchange that screen into a single screen. Some people do it gradually. Single screen first to get the order through so they don't fight, and then totally remove that screen eventually. Just put a queen excluder in there because the originally one colony, the order is similar. So now the workers can move between, but the queens are separate. Some people even don't have an excluder. Queens will coexist fine until sometime in the fall when contracting the brood nest, and one queen will probably kill the other one in September, October. Natural process. So, but in the summer you have so many. You'll have 20 frames of brood and none of bees. So that's how you make a lot of honey. It's because of the nonlinear system. So if you have a colony with 20 frames of bees, you have 60% of bees as foragers. Whereas if you have a colony with 10 frames of bees, you only have 30% foragers. It's not linear. So if you split that 20 frame into two colonies, you don't make the same amount of honey that one single colony would make. That's why a double queen colony, a two queen colony can make way more honey for you. Uh, if it's the same amount of bees you split in 4 or 5 colonies, you actually have less honey because of that proportion of foragers go down, way down. It's not linear. It's not fixed 40%. So if I create an experimental colony with 2,000 bees, I have 5 or 10% bees foraging at most. But as soon as you have 20 frames, yeah, in Michigan, end of June, you have most of the bees are foragers. 60, 70% bees are foraging. That's why you have more nectar production.
All right, so I'm going to just address the questions that are related to the modified Demeray again. So I did find the slides, but basically I'll take, so on the left is the way that the hive would kind of look normally. And so I would come out there, I'd have two deeps, and then maybe I'd bring two mediums or one medium with me. I'd put the queen in the bottom box. So that's if I see her. Otherwise, I just shake all the bees to the bottom box. And then I do add a queen excluder. So someone said, was there a queen excluder between the top and the bottom? And it has to be just somewhere between the two because you want to have those bees up above be separate. So here I show it um, with below the two mediums. You could add another deep in there. This isn't exact about where it needs to be. And then you would put all of the brood at the top. Someone said, in this configuration, do you have an entrance at the top of the hive? You don't need it to have an entrance at the top of the hive. I often do. I have an entrance incorporated into part of my lid. I have a spacer under my lids that have an entrance, but sometimes they propolize it up. Um, so it doesn't really, it's not necessary because the bees, they're still moving through all of these. Um, there's a question that says if you aren't going to add a queen to the top box of your split, would it be okay to let them raise their own? Do you take the box off in order to do that after it's warm at night? So you can let them raise up their own. I'm doing that in a couple this year just because I don't have time. And what I'm going to, you just have to make sure that you're taking good notes, that you remove it before the virgin's going to emerge, because that virgin could fit through the queen excluder and then kill your queen down below. What you could do, as Zachary was talking about, is actually putting a double screen there and then running it as a two queen system eventually. And then in that case, of course, you'd need an upper entrance. But if I'm going to let them raise up a queen, I'm going to remove them basically once it's warm enough. One of the reasons that I like to move them when it's cold out is that you're going to get way more bees in that split. Whereas if you move it during the daytime on a nice sunny day, there's going to be a lot more bees foraging. That brood up top won't need a lot of coverage. So I actually do like it where I will purposefully move it during like nighttime or cold weather. All right. And then there are questions about where you put the hives once you split them. So like in the easiest way to split, where do you place the two hives? It doesn't really matter. Um, they will have the bees will go back to the original location. So you just kind of accommodate for that with the types of split or where with what you're doing. And you can always equalize it later. But if you've got, one hive in the original location and you make a split and you move it to a new location, you maybe would want to make that split quite a bit heavier, meaning that it has way more bees in it because all the ones that know how to fly are going to go back to the other one. So I think that's all the questions. Oh, someone says, what is warm enough to remove the top box? Honestly, last year I did splits when it was very, very cold out because I had to take students down to Texas for a rotation, and it was perfectly fine. Um, it depends. Like if you take it while it's cold, like I said, you'll get enough bees to cover that top box. But I'm usually making the splits right about now. We're getting down to 40 at night, but since I'm making them so heavy and I'm leaving them with lots of bees, I feel comfortable taking them, even though it's going to dip down into the 30s and 40s here. I don't think I would do it if it's getting much colder than that. All right, so there is a question about record keeping, a question about the high losses that we've been experiencing, and then someone says, what activities are you planning for doing the rest of the month? So I think that'll kind of get us um, to the end of it. And like I said, people can always submit things later. So I'll talk briefly about what I know for the high losses that were reported for this year, because we don't know that much, but I will just at least address what we do know or what we've heard. So, in January, a couple of the very large beekeepers out west reported that they had very, very high losses, unusually high for them. The reason it was reported in January was because that's when they were going to take their bees out of winter storage in preparation of bringing them to almonds. Um, they kind of sounded the alarm. They work very closely with Project APSM, which is a nonprofit that does a lot of research for the beekeeping industry. And they started to do a lot of research. So there are people looking into pesticides. There's people looking into amitraz resistance, which is varroa mites that have become resistant to the miticides that we have. There's people looking into a lot of things. It's honestly very hard to tell what killed a colony after it's dead because the bees are gone in a lot of cases, or it's hard to get information from dead bees. So it's unsure what we'll find out. One of the big thoughts is that it could be mites that are becoming resistant to different miticides. So we did get at MSU some emergency funding from Project APSM to go look into that question in particular. And so we're working with one of the big beekeepers and so I'm actually going out to North Dakota this coming week, and we're going to try lots of different miticides and look for resistant genes and resistant behaviors of the mites to those miticides. So that's one of the things that people say it could be, but we really honestly don't know, and it'll be a while that we get information if we do get information. I do have to say though that the losses are not universal. So, like I said, at MSU and in my own bees, our bees did just fine. I have the joy of talking to beekeepers from all over the state, and most people that I've talked to in Michigan had pretty normal years. And so we have beekeepers that did have a pretty poor year. We had beekeepers that also had pretty okay years and some who did great. So it's definitely not something that's universal um, across that. Zachary, did you want to add anything to that? I don't know if you've heard anything differently.
Yeah, all I heard is that it's higher than usual. It's about 65% compared to normal is 55%. So it's at least 10 to 15% higher than usual. And second one is we don't know the actual cause, whether it's mites or pesticides or nutrition. Anyway, we do know honey yield was probably not as good in Michigan last year compared to the year before. So I don't know if that played any role in the winter loss or not. So
And I do have to say that the Michigan beekeepers did awesome in responding to the survey. So when we have a high response rate, we actually get our statewide data back. And I know a couple weeks ago we were above like 200 people responding and like way better than lots of other states. So way to go, Michigan, for that. So we should get state specific data um, as well. There is a question that says, when would you add a second brood box after a split? I've been adding them basically right away. But again, a big part of it is that I run my entire beekeeping operation out of a garage and I like to have the equipment out in the field. But especially if, I'm making some really big splits, I'm adding them. All right. So then the question is, what activities are you planning for during the upcoming month? So, well, I'll tell you for research because that's kind of fun. So I'm going out to North Dakota for that propolis or for the Varroa trial. We're starting a trial looking at lots of things to do with propolis. We're starting trials looking at different types of foundation. And then, of course, we have our European um, fall brood work always. And I'm getting very excited for European fall brood season to start. In my own bees, what I'll be doing is basically once I get them set up, is after all the splits, I'll go through and make sure everybody is queen right because I would like everybody to be queen right and have lots of space so I can leave them alone to make honey. I'm also going to be starting my Varroa management beyond just the splits this year. So I'll be using in the summer when I'm putting supers on both Formic Pro and Viroxan, which is the new oxalic acid one. Um, and we'll be putting those. And I actually ordered them today, so I have them on the way so that they'll be um, ready to go for the next month. Zachary, what are you going to be doing the next month?
uh, we'll be doing some experiment with a transportation study. So we got funding from USDA to study how trucking bees affect their physiology and health. So we actually went to Georgia in January, did painted like 10,000 bees and sampled them in the freezer. So now we're going to, I think this week we're going to extract some DNA to look at the microbiome of bees that are transported and that are stationary as a control. So we'll see if there's any negative impact on that.
Very cool. There is a question that I skipped over and it said, in terms of record keeping, what is the most important? I take notes. I still use paper out in the bee yard. That's the easiest for me. And I give every hive a number. And then what I'll do is basically just record down one line of what I did to that hive. And I'll just say that the queen has been seen and then what I did. I've found when I try to do more than that, it just takes up a lot of time and isn't that important. So I'll record if there's a queen issue. A lot of times it'll just say okay, meaning that it's fine. I went out there, I checked queen right. So I always check for queen right, meaning that I see eggs, that they have a sufficient amount of space, that they don't see signs of disease. If I do a mite wash, I'll write down the mite count. and then whether or not they have enough food. And so I'll say a lot of times my notes will just say, you know, okay, if they have queen right and they have enough food, or light gave them food, or crowded gave them space, added brood, or kind of whatever I did. Because it is nice to go back and be like, oh, I saw virgin there last time. But I would say those would be the things that are the most important. Um, all right, I think we might actually get through. So someone said you may have touched on this, but will the bees reorganize themselves if there's brood in my super? I think for that one, you're going to have to go back and listen to the recording. But basically, we are doing this is the one time of year that I'm really doing arrangement of brood. So I am taking the bees and I will be moving the brood either in a split, or you'll be reversing them, moving the brood down to the bottom. And then the last question, it says, are the bees swarming earlier this year than typical? And in my experience, no. I have seen swarms on April 30th, but we're right. For me, in Jackson, Ingham counties, it feels like a very, very typical year in terms of degree days and swarming. Um, Zachary, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Nope. So for you guys, I think the main activity would be swarm control in the
Yes.
next 3 or 4 weeks, just to make sure you don't lose half of your bees and your original queen, which you paid big money. Uh, uh,
Yeah, so definitely making splits, equalizing, making sure that that capped brood is away from the big heavy queens. And then also, I guess, starting queen rearing too. So there's a question if we're seeing mature drones. I'm seeing some, but not tons. So we'll start rearing queens.
yeah,
All right.
Megan and I are still discussing whether we will host queen rearing in June, but I don't know was your schedule in North Dakota, were you able to do it or not?
Yeah, every single year I say I'm gonna be better about saying no to things, and then here I am flying to North Dakota next week after just
Yeah,
coming back from Georgia. So we'll see. It is a good time to be doing, there's too many questions to ask basically for bee research.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for all of the excellent questions. It's always really interesting for us to see what people have to say. And hopefully we'll see you at one of the upcoming events or in the next month's office hours. So bye
Yeah.
everyone.
Bye.